Hi, everybody. Welcome to one of our Careers Week Q&A sessions with St George's alumni. Today, we're focusing a little bit on the postgraduate side of the options that are available to you. And today we have Rosie Dutt with us, who is a biomedical scientist, or was at St George's, graduated from BMS in 2015. And we are very lucky to have Rosie today. She's very busy, and you're going to hear why in a minute, because she is she gets engaged in a lot of things. So I'm hoping this is going to be really interesting, both for those of you who are interested in doing a PhD, but equally for those that might be interested in other types of courses like masters when you when you finish your undergraduate studies. So looking at the different options and how that might form your career journey as you go along. So today, Rosie is actually, it's very early in the morning. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2:30 in the afternoon here. But Rosie is actually in the USA. So she's currently doing a PhD at Washington University, St. Louis, which is in Missouri. But we're going to hear a little bit more about that. And Rosie's going to explain about her pathway through and all of the things that she's doing at the moment, which are quite different in the US system to the way that they are in the UK. But she's done both. So she's done master's courses over here and also a PhD in the US. So without further ado, Rosie, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate you giving up your time. But so to kick off, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your journey to this point at the moment? So talking about your time at St George's and the path you've taken since then.
Great. Yeah, my name is Rosie, as you all know, and I started my degree in biomedical sciences at St George's in 2012. I decided to do this particular degree because I wasn't aware of what I wanted to focus on specifically. So I had an interest in neuroscience, but I didn't want to specialize so quickly, and the biomedical sciences course allowed me to sort of cycle through the different specialties of medicine and actually discern if I really was interested within the field. So this was particularly useful for me because I did realize I was not only interested in neuroscience, but I was also interested in the psychological aspects of the brain and also the psychiatric component. So during my final year, I did a range of different sort of brain-related courses, from clinical neuroscience to the neuroscience of sensation and perception to the psychiatry of the mind. And I really enjoyed this, and following on from that, I decided, okay, I want to learn a little bit more about psychology, and I went on to do a taught master's at Durham University in the Department of Psychology and Cognitive Neuroscience. Here I was exposed to different neuropsychological frameworks that can be applied to different research questions, and I was also exposed to how imaging techniques can be used to discern various different hypotheses within the brain. So from there, I said, okay, great. I then went on to doing a bit of teaching, as I really enjoyed teaching, and that came from sort of my experience as sort of an anatomy demonstrator at St George's, and doing a couple of workshops and talks at Durham. I was actually part of Trevelyan College, which is a research-focused college itself, so I did a lot of talks there. I then sort of went on to teaching in my year out, and I had experience with sort of various individuals in various different settings, from sort of teaching in a psychiatric ward to teaching in a drama school to teaching in a learning disability centre, and working with sort of students from the government that may be in care homes or high risk. I then decided I do want to be within sort of the academic field, so I decided I'll go back, and I went to study a master's at Imperial. This was a research master's, so moving from sort of the learning component to research, from sort of the undergraduate degree to a taught master's to now a research master's. Here I actually studied bioimaging science within the Department of Chemistry. So I learned more about sort of the how you can use imaging to understand what's going on within the brain. And here my research focused on the impact of head injuries on children. So I actually was working with Great Ormond Street Hospital, and I did a study on how sort of structural changes and functional changes occur within the brain following a traumatic brain injury, and how that impacted children both psychologically and behaviorally. And then I decided I was really interested in the teaching component of academia as opposed to just the research, and I wanted to have more of a focus on teaching. And this is quite a rare option within sort of the UK and Europe. It's very rare to want to do the teaching intensive route in academia. You usually have a more stronger sort of leaning to teaching, to research as opposed to teaching. And as a result, I started looking for PhDs in America, and I applied several different PhDs, and then I came across the idea that there is only 2 imaging science PhDs in America, which sort of correlate to my training at Imperial College London. So the PhD was in imaging science, and it's a very new field that's upcoming to apply sort of imaging techniques to clarify different hypotheses that we have. So one of the programs was at Washington University in St. Louis, and the other one was in RIT in New York. And I decided to apply at Washington University in St. Louis. I was also aware of the professor that I applied with, and she actually moved from Oxford to WashU to start her lab. So I was already pretty familiar with her. She kind of helped me through the process a little bit in terms of the application. And yeah, I was successfully sort of admitted into the program, and now I'm in my 2nd year of my PhD, finishing up courses, somewhat different to England. So they usually have sort of courses in their 1st and 2nd year, and then you go on to sort of full-time research within the latter part of your PhD. So once I finish my final semester of courses, I'll be moving on to sort of full-time research. So that's kind of my journey from St. George's to WashU.
Wow. Okay. So that's fantastic. So thank you, Rosie. That's a really interesting pathway. So 2 masters under your belt before you went to the US. So there's a kind of a couple of questions I've got there, and obviously one of the concerns that students have at the moment, if they are looking to stay in academia or progress through, is the funding elements of that and how costly that can be. Do you have any advice, or are you able to kind of tell us a little bit about how you were able to manage that they could perhaps learn from?
Yeah, so during my master's at Durham, I was actually given a scholarship. So you can apply for several different scholarships that are available. And usually if you're sort of relocating from a different area, you're more likely to get the scholarship. So there were scholarships that were university-wide, there was scholarships that were sort of college-wide. There's also sort of funding from the government in the UK as well that you can apply for. Also, I did take a year out and I was teaching, and that sort of was a personal development thing in terms of my career, but also allowed me to make some money. So I think there are different options if you look for them. In the UK, I know that you should be on a master's prior to your PhD, whereas in America, that's not necessarily the case. So a lot of people go from their undergraduate directly to their PhD, because the PhD has sort of the master's embedded. So even though PhDs are fully funded in America, they're also fully funded usually in England. So the difference is sort of just that getting that master's is sort of the prerequisite for the PhD in England. But that's also to say there are sort of 3+1 programs with the master's and the PhD combined. So a lot of students can apply for that, and that way it's sort of fully funded and you're already sort of directly on the pathway. If you want to, you can try and apply to America, but usually it's useful if you know someone, or if you've done some research with them. It's more easier to get in here, as they know your work, and it's more of a time commitment in America, being 5 years with the professor as opposed to sort of 3 in England. So there are different funding options out there, but yeah, I think it's more about sort of looking for that funding, knowing that you will have to, if you're not able to get onto a PhD, and it's very rare to jump from an undergraduate to a PhD straight away in the UK. It's very rare to do that, but investing in a master's is usually the way forward. And if that's not an option, then a 3+1 program is. If you have research networks within America and you've sort of collaborated through your master's programs, you're able to actually come over to the States through that avenue. And that's not to say you can't do that during your master's. You can also do that during your PhD and do your postdoc in America. So,
Okay, fantastic. All right. And so you mentioned about meeting the person that you're working with, the professor that you're working with at the moment, who kind of led you to the US in some respect, although you were looking at that as an option already, but they then subsequently led you to where you are now. So how important is networking for you in getting you to where you are at the moment? And again, sort of the advice that you'd give to others. Obviously, networking can be quite something that people find quite a painful concept. But tell us a little bit about how networking has really paid off for you, and made this situation occur for you.
Okay, great. So yeah, I guess I have a background in science communication, so I like talking. And I guess sort of my earliest example that's not sort of academically related was when I was the science editor at Imperial College London for their weekly newspaper. So I was actually the brand ambassador for the Times newspaper and the Sunday Times newspaper on campus, and they were looking to sort of increase their readership among sort of STEM majors, STEM undergraduate and graduate students. And then from there, we ran an event with the science editor, Tom Whipple, and I just met him for about 2 minutes, and I said, "Hi, Tom, I'm brand ambassador. I think your work's really cool. I'm looking for some experience. Could I come shadow you, even if it's for a day? I think that would be really useful." And he just said, "Yeah, sure, just send me your CV and I'll take a look." So he seemed very uninterested. He seemed like he didn't really want to have this conversation. And as soon as I sent him my CV, he kind of arranged for me to come in the next week. I was there for 2 days. I covered the NASA twin study. It was the same time as the girl who had shown the picture for the black hole, same week that came out. So that's just a short example of kind of networking and sort of not in an academic setting. But now in terms of sort of my PhD, I was actually at a neuroscience conference at Imperial, and I was actually in media during that conference. And my friend had dropped out because she wasn't feeling well, so I was presenting, just by chance in her place. But I was very aware of who was coming to the neuroscience conference, and I already knew who I wanted to speak to. And one of the ladies was indeed the person I'm currently working with at WashU. She actually was working as a postdoctoral fellow at Oxford University in the imaging science sort of field, and I'd read her book for my master's program, and I was very pointedly looking to speak to her. So once I spoke with her, independent of sort of the poster session, I sort of explained, this is the research that I do. I think the work that you do is really cool. Could I come shadow you? And when she said, send me an email, she also saw me present. Following that interaction, I sent her an email, and it was actually her final week in the UK, and she was actually moving to America that weekend. And she stated, "It would be great to have you. However, I'm moving to America. Have you considered America as an option for a PhD?" And funnily enough, I actually had an interview with her boss in Oxford that same week to actually do a research assistant sort of like a piece there for about a year or two. And then she was also sort of considering, do you want to do a research assistant position in America? And sort of it's a bit difficult as a PhD, if you haven't got a PhD, to sort of just come over and work. So because I was already applying for sort of PhDs, I'd already done the entry exam, so the GRE, I'd already written applications, I was aware of kind of the process. She suggested, why don't you, think about applying to WashU. So I'd already sort of looked at the different universities, and I'd put in sort of my first round of applications, and I was taking a bit of a breather, focusing on the interviews in England. So I'd had an interview for a PhD at Imperial, a research assistant position at Oxford, and I also was shortlisted for a PhD in Canada. So I was kind of waiting, taking a little break from some of the US applications. So during that period, she suggested, well, WashU was still open. It was already on my radar to have a look at WashU and RIT, as these are the only two courses in America that offer the imaging science PhD. So I decided, let's go for it. And yeah, here I am. So yeah, I think it worked well in terms of being at the conference, reaching out to her, talking to her. I think maybe it would have been a little bit different had I not sort of spoken with her and just applied, because a PhD in America is 5 years and a PhD in England is 3. And I think sort of being an international student, if you're trying to go to another country, it's important that you actually reach out to the professors prior, show you're interested, have some conversation. If they're eager to have you, then it's much more of a smoother process if you meet the other requirements of kind of the entry exams and the grades and all that other stuff. So yeah.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So really paying off. Lucky in some respects, but also I think it's just about you've been very proactive in getting and continuing in your education and sourcing funding. And I know you funded yourself, didn't you, through the Imperial Masters, through working and parts taking a year to work, was it, in between the two different masters you were doing? So there was kind of great will there on your part. You've mentioned as well about your writing. I do want to hear a little bit about the experience of being in the US and how that is as well. But I think just in terms of your writing, tell us a little bit about that, because that's quite an unusual combination that we sometimes, you might assume that people that go very heavily and deeply in the academic direction of science may not be so keen on that side of things. But you've been able to kind of marry the two sides together. It's been a real bonus for you, hasn't it, being able to be quite good at writing and communicating. Can you tell us a little bit about where that all started? Because I think that started at St. George's, or might know when you were 8, possibly, maybe well before that. But what you did,
So during sort of one of my childhood, I really enjoyed writing. I really enjoyed sort of comprehension, and I decided, I was entering sort of competitions. So I did like the World Citizenship competition. I was winning when I was writing. So I really enjoyed sort of the writing process. But then sort of my interest in science was somewhat more of, it took more sort of onus, I guess, over kind of the writing aspect of my life. So I decided at some point when I got to St. George's, I don't need to just do writing. I mean, science, I can also do writing. I can do both. So I was part of different societies at St. George's, and I would write at different levels for sort of their local, like their newsletters and sort of chapter society-wide kind of emails and stuff like that. Then I was recruited to a national organization for students. And here I was the editor-in-chief for a biannual magazine on different sort of student issues within the field of science and marrying it with religion and philosophy. Thought it was super cool. It was very different to kind of my main research in science, and completely opposite, given sort of philosophical and religious aspects you should consider and how they kind of intertwine with science. So that was particularly interesting. And so I did the editor-in-chief position for about a year and a half there. And then I went to Durham, and there during my time at Trevelyan College, I was actually a contributing writer to the Hex magazine, which was just a college magazine that was sort of released every quarter. And then from there I went to Imperial, and I said, okay, now that I've had some experience writing, I feel more comfortable to go for sort of positions where I'm in charge and I know how to manage my time. So I went for the science editor position. Every week we had to publish. I had a group of other science editors under me, so I had to sort of send out the emails every Friday, get everyone interested in writing. It was a very short turnaround of time. I needed a draft, I needed to review the draft, and I needed to have everything sort of in paper layout by the next Thursday for print on Friday. And then from there, I decided, okay, when I was in America, I was interested in science policy, and I really wanted to understand the intersection between sort of how science can really sort of come to like the public. So in England, if you sort of speak with the media, it's usually there's a lot of changes that occur, but in America, the media is kind of distrusted. So I decided, okay, science policy may be a great route. So I looked for sort of positions in America, voluntary positions, and I found this associate editor position in the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. And then from there, after a semester, I was moved to assistant editor-in-chief, and I should hopefully head back by next week if I get the editor-in-chief position this year. So I guess I really wanted to do editing and writing, science writing alongside science, and I guess it's kind of gone from sort of abstract writing within sort of a random field, kind of related to science at a very vague level, to now quite specific issues within science. So yeah, I decided that I wanted to have both my scientific career and my writing career. And actually, after the first year of my PhD, I actually did an internship for 2 weeks with the science editor for the Sunday Times newspaper. And one of the things that Jonathan Leake said to me was, Rosie, you need to keep writing, you need to keep building your portfolio, because it was quite evident I hadn't written for about a year. So I'd come back and you could see there were certain things I was now writing more as a scientist as opposed to a communicator. So as a result of that, I work with 500 women scientists. I'm actually on the international leadership team, and I actually head up the editing team, and I also highlight scientists, women scientists, every month. I also am a contributing writer for engineers and scientists acting locally, and this is just sort of a blog of individuals that write about different science and engineering organizations in the country, and their sort of work. So at the moment, I've just finished writing about a group of scientists that have created a block project. So it's just building houses in the back gardens of different individuals in Seattle to reduce the problem of homelessness, but they're taking into consideration, the engineering, the architecture, even mental health, and having like plants and flowers in the garden, how to make it a more livable space, but with that mindful concept. So I've always enjoyed writing, and I've been seeking out different opportunities to continue writing. And that's not independent of sort of just science. Within my current sort of degree at the moment, I'm actually a writing instructor for a genomics course. Genomics is not something that I have any specialty in. I did it at St. George's during sort of the different clinical medical specialties we rotate through, but I have a baseline knowledge, but my work as a writing instructor for the course really does come from all my experiences. So I think leveraging my ability to write, to edit, to communicate within the realm of science really makes me quite valuable. So I would say this is a career that you can also go down. There's lots of jobs in medical writing. There's lots of jobs in editing. If you want to be sort of a journal editor, it's a bit different because you need a PhD, but generally there's a lot of scientific communication avenues that that people can focus on. And I know it's sort of on the rise in England. As when I was leaving, I think the science communication masters was running in its second year at Imperial, but within America, given sort of the various things that go on in the media and the distrust around sort of scientific findings, there's a lot of focus here in America in terms of science policy, science communication. I'm actually involved in a statewide initiative. So it's the Missouri Science and Technology Fellowship. So these are individuals, it's in its first year that's running. These are individuals that speak to legislators about science. So they write a 2-page cover memo, essentially, or 2-page kind of document on the science of a particular bill that they're going to discuss. So for instance, maternal mortality is a big issue in Missouri. Black mothers are more likely, I think 4 times more likely to die giving birth than white mothers. So what the fellows did is they wrote a 2-page summary of all the science in relation to this and gave it to the legislators. So at the moment, there's only one individual in sort of government and parliament for America, which has a PhD, and everyone else, there's only about 6%, which is 2 individuals that have a STEM major background. So there are various sort of avenues if you want to go down sort of science writing, science editing, even science policy within sort of even within England. So I would say it's a career that you can consider if you enjoy writing and if you enjoy science. You don't need to just do one.
No, I mean, I think that's extremely impressive to hear about what you've also crammed in alongside your 2 master's courses. And I think probably the most interesting thing about it is the fact that you've kept it going, and it started many years ago, but you've gradually added and added and added and added to your experiences, which have just grown and grown because you've sought out those opportunities to develop them. And I think probably one of the questions on everybody's mind is, how do you fit it all in? What advice do you give to people that might be listening to you thinking, oh my goodness, how on earth was all that achieved? Which is the reaction I have from it.
Yeah.
And in terms of your own time management, and your attitude. We will talk about mental health and resilience and those types of things at the moment particularly, but have you got any advice or just your own techniques that we can learn from to help ourselves really to reach our goals and to keep moving in the right direction?
Yeah, so I guess one of the first things is when you're doing something, like when you start it initially, so for instance, if you start learning a new language, it's very difficult in the beginning, but then after a while, it becomes sort of automated in your mind. So in terms of sort of adding on within my career, after a while, things become very much automatic. You're able to sort of edit things very quickly. You're able to find the issues. So I think once you get to that point, people stop and think they're great and they're done and they've reached kind of the pinnacle of this, but actually what you should do is be striving for more. So once something becomes, in my opinion, a little bit boring to me because it's automated, I start looking for new experiences and within a different field. So you can see I'm doing writing, but I'm doing writing in several different fields. And I think opportunities are out there, so you should search for them, and starting early is something that's extremely important. So I've always enjoyed teaching. My first job was a Kumon teacher in my local Kumon centre at the age of 16, and then it went from being an anatomy demonstrator at George's to being a tutor with the government and privately to then now sort of teaching at WashU as a professor of instruction for a coding class and now a writing class. And that's not to say I've stopped. I'm still actually looking for different teaching opportunities that are present within the university itself, but also looking forward as well. I've even identified different institutions that I could work with and that I could leverage sort of my different experiences to be a sort of a faculty or a lecturer there. So I'm currently already in talks with another university to do that. The next thing, so that the third point would be sort of time management. So I know everyone says you should manage your time well, but how can you manage your time, I guess, is a question everyone should answer. And I think that what really helps me is I create a list every day for the week, or what needs to be done, and I try and sort of get through the list pretty quickly with sort of time urgent factors. So for instance, so sort of personally right now, I've got to do several things. I've got a presentation that's due on Friday. I've got to write a research statement. I've got to write a paper discussion. I've got to prepare for my midterm next week. I've got to write a midterm for my class next week. So what I would do is I'd have it all on paper and I'd have which one needs to be done first. And then I'd sort of tackle that sort of independently. And I think also focusing on the fact that if you're not able to sort of focus on one particular sort of point on your list, you can sort of procrastinate onto the other point as opposed to just not doing anything at all and procrastinating completely. So I think ensuring that you are aware of the different things that you have to do and sort of the deadlines that you have to do them by. So that's something that I'm very cognizant of, given the number of things that I'm involved in. And frankly speaking, I can't really mess up in any of them because they're pretty high profile. So, if I don't prepare for my lecture, I'm not going to be able to teach students. If I don't prepare for my exam, I'm not going to be able to pass my semester. So there's I think also urgency, maybe from an external source, has also enabled me to be very much focused. That's not to say that you can't have a life. You can, I travel a lot. I'm very social. So if you're able to manage your time well, I think it really works. So yeah.
It's a great skill to have, isn't it? Because then you can do it all. And thank you as well. It's lovely to hear those kind of reassuring words that opportunity is out there. I like that very much, that you said, that's what you said. And it's kind of that optimism that just keep exploring and finding what lies beneath, as it were, because some things aren't blatantly obvious. Have you used things like LinkedIn very much, Rosie, with your networking? Do you get, is that something that you've used much?
So it's quite funny. So I am currently I don't use LinkedIn because usually I just send an email and communicate like that. But I know a lot of people that have. And what I'm actually doing is, once I kind of finish with these applications that I'm applying, that I'm doing for sort of like career positions, what I will be doing is fixing my LinkedIn, because I know I have a lot that I could sort of put on LinkedIn, but it's also sort of presenting myself in a way that I now want to be seen, because I know I'm known in several spheres, and I don't really use LinkedIn, but I know that if I started to use it, I could really leverage sort of my experience and my positions. And I have several friends that have actually gained internships, so from sort of England in Canada, or internships in other countries like Norway and Spain and various places, just through LinkedIn. Even people sort of attain jobs through LinkedIn. So it's a very useful process, and I think that how you can leverage it is by connecting with individuals, asking questions. A lot of people are very happy to help. Also, by somebody just showing interest in their work, and from there they can usually give you their time, or they will sort of point you in the direction to someone else. So something very simple as, hi, I've seen your work, I think it's really interesting. Would you have some time to tell me a little bit more about it? If not, could you direct me to someone who's a bit more aligned with my interests? And it's just a message. If they don't respond, you're nowhere different from the position you were at previously. If they do respond, it's a plus. So I would say there's really no harm or shame in sort of sending sort of messages, sending emails. And for PhDs, that's usually what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to send an email to a professor and hope they respond after seeing 2 sentences with an email with your CV. So networking, it's a skill, of course, but after doing it several times, you'll realize what things are working, what things aren't. So sort of my advice would be just go out there and do it. I've done it sort of face to face, but even in the pandemic, I was sending emails out. So that's not to say I couldn't do the same thing on LinkedIn. I think the medium may differ, but the content that you sort of put forward to the individual is the exact same.
I think it's probably quite useful for unearthing people sometimes, isn't it? And trying to find people with similar interests if you're struggling to. But of course, there's lots of different avenues to do that as well, like conferences and just knowing people that are within your own interest area. Thank you very much, Rosie. I think we're probably running out of time a little bit now. So I think, is there anything? So I think the last question, really, although I haven't really asked you about your experience in America. There's so much that we could speak about today, and about why that's so great and why you've gone into that. So maybe 2 things. One is just briefly say what you think are kind of the pros and cons of studying abroad like you are at the moment. What have been the benefits, maybe particularly? And then lastly, what advice you would give to the class of 2020 or 2021 that have either come out or are coming out soon from university, or might be thinking about a similar academic pathway. What advice you would give?
Great. So I guess the differences between America and the UK, I guess the first thing is like the foods and the snacks are very different to the UK. So we have like Walkers, they have Lay's, we have like Cadbury chocolate, they have like Hershey's. So it's somewhat different. I actually just got a package the other day from England, so it had like Marmite and like the things that are British. So I think the food is somewhat different. That's not to say it's not better or worse. I think it's just sugar is not as regulated here, so things are much more sweeter and calorific, I guess. I think some of the differences in terms of sort of like academically, it's much more, I think sort of prior to the PhD, it's much more competitive, given that everyone's sort of graded on the scale. So, how you do is impacted by how your peers do. So I think that's something that I wouldn't really like. And I think in England, the work you do is just the work you do, and your grade is independent of the class. So the scaling system is something that I'm not really a fan of. I think that universities here are pretty grand. Like, I mean, my background is my university, so it looks very much like a castle when I first got here. So I think campus life here usually is pretty big. There's a lot of sort of sports going on. There's a lot of different opportunities, but they sort of are the same in England as well. I particularly enjoy being in the Midwest, which is very weird, I'm sure, because everyone thinks of sort of New York and California, but being in St. Louis, it's kind of the center of the country. It has a lot of history, so it was at one point the site for sort of the first Olympics. It was the site for several different things like there's a lot of things that St. Louis is known for, but also in terms of travel, I can travel to the East Coast and the West Coast very quickly, even the South and the North. You also get all four seasons here, so it was like minus 20 the other day, and it gets up to kind of 40 degrees here. So you get sort of all 4 seasons. People are very friendly in the Midwest. Yeah, so I think it's very different. It's a different sort of lifestyle compared to England. I mean, they have like pancakes for breakfast, which is, you know, very, very different to kind of, I don't know, cereal or like oats, whatever, back home. Yeah, I think it's a different experience. I think being in a more bigger city, or being in the coast would be somewhat similar to England, London, where I'm from, compared to kind of being in the Midwest, where the culture is very different. So yeah, that's a kind of guess. The big difference is I'm enjoying it. I think it's great in terms of traveling. It's kind of like a mini Europe within the country. You sort of just travel. They're not as well connected as England in terms of like public transport, so that's something that differs. People like don't use the public transport, whereas like the tube is like the big thing in London. I used to get to St George's on the tube, but even though we have free like metro passes, everyone really drives because of the distance. Everyone loves road trips here, so 6 hours is nothing for people, which is crazy because, you know, I used to live in Durham, which was like probably 8 hours drive, and I think that was crazy. So yeah, driving 6 hours to 8 hours for people is completely normal, which I think is insane. But yeah, even I get used to it now. Yeah, so but yeah, so that's kind of the differences, and everyone's quite friendly here, and yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I don't really have many complaints. And in terms of kind of sort of final words, I think that you know, everyone kind of thinks they see someone and they think, you know, what that individual has is unattainable and unachievable. But actually, if you really plan where you want to go and you actively take steps of being proactive as opposed to kind of waiting for something to happen, you can definitely be in the same position as someone else. So it's about researching, it's about networking, it's about planning your time, and it's about trying your best to focus on the goal at hand, but not being too rigid. Because if I was rigid on the fact like I want to be on the East Coast or the West Coast and I don't want to be in Missouri, I could have turned this down, for instance. Or, you know, I don't want to do a second master's, but I really wanted to learn more, and there's no shame in kind of the path that you're taking compared to somebody else. So a lot of people say you have several degrees, are you going to do another one? I was like, maybe, you know. So at the end of the day, it's about kind of finding what you enjoy, because at the end of the day, if you enjoy it, you're going to be doing great at it. So I enjoy the sciences, I enjoy writing, and I marry them together. So even if you think there isn't a route for things to sort of come together, if you look hard enough, they usually always is. So I would say don't give up. Focus on trying your best. Look for other people, network, communicate, find out how they did it, and then just go after it. And yeah, it should work.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Yeah, no, that's really been fantastic, and again, really inspirational to hear your story of where you've gone since St George's. It's just so lovely to hear, and I hope it just goes from strength to strength. Your career, it sounds like it is going in that direction, very much so. But those tips are great that we can all take on board, so that our careers go from strength to strength. So thank you very much for your time and for sharing that, and also for letting us put it on YouTube, which is going to be on as well. So yeah, thank you, and fantastic, and just really amazed with what you've done. So thank you.
No worries.